History has, to a large extent, been driven by a struggle between four castes, as I call them, occupational groups, I suppose is the best way to think about it. Merchants, soldiers, sages and workers. Merchants and soldiers and sages have tended to be the most powerful. That's why they're in the title, but workers have also been important in the 20th century. And each of those groups has particular value systems. Bankers have penetrated and hijacked, if you like, the political class to some extent. But I would go further than that. I don't think it's just political influence. I would say it's a cultural influence, and that's why I use this term merchant caste rather than the bankers or than the capitalist class. I would say that it's the values of the merchant that have penetrated the political class, if you like, that New Labour, as much as the Conservatives, were very much taken over by the idea that somehow merchants were good. We needed more flexibility, entrepreneurialism would solve everything, markets were good, and could solve everything. So that's why I use this concept merchant caste to point to this intellectual and cultural capture as well as a political capture. The group most susceptible to revolutions has tended to be aristocracies. You know, 19th century aristocracy, if you think about the French Revolution or the Russian Revolution, those were very much against warrior soldier aristocracies. And that is because aristocracies were very overtly inegalitarian and snobbish and treated people as inferiors. Merchants are much more flexible, and they can also argue that they are very equal. They're in favour of equality, even though, of course, they allow a lot of economic inequality. Culturally, they can say, we are very egalitarian. You know, everybody is equal under the market. You're all consumers. We're going to appeal to you as consumers. And I think that's partly why people have been taken in by the merchant, because the merchant has said, well, we're bringing everybody, consumer society. We're not snobs. We will allow everybody to participate in culture. Sages can be a bit more culturally snobbish. I'm not saying that history is the history of elites at all. As I said earlier, merchants are not just bankers, they're also small business people and people who work in commercial firms. When I use the word worker, I would argue that workers are, really we're talking about the working class, unskilled working class, who have an egalitarian value system or an artisanal value system. And yes, they have been generally much less powerful in world history than the other three groups. And but they did make a huge difference to world history between about the 1880s and 1970s, and it was trade unions and workers through trade unions who fought for the welfare state, fought for franchise, fought for democracy. That probably wouldn't have happened without those movements. Since the 1970s, those in the West at least, those groups have become much less powerful. Actually, throughout the world, they've become much less powerful. So to leave workers out of the title doesn't mean I don't think workers are important. I would say workers have been massively important in developing democracy. But today, unfortunately, they're rather less powerful. In the book, I very much argue that we've got to change the balance and move towards much more worker power and more sagely power, and move away from merchant power.